Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jessie Nealand, and some feedback that I've gotten from you all, which thank you by the way, it's totally accurate, on my 4 body image avatars is that when I talk about the ways in which those avatars are expressed through someone's body image issues, a lot of times I'm veering towards the side of the spectrum of privileged bodies. Meaning, a thin, conventionally attractive, able-bodied person might see themselves in the stuff that I've written, in the videos that I've made, more easily than someone who is towards the side of the spectrum of marginalized bodies or oppressed bodies, such as someone who is living with a disability or lives in a large body. They might find it slightly less relatable because what I've been talking about is how it expresses itself. And of course, everybody's individual, so there will be unique and individual experiences for each person, but there are definitely trends for how this expresses itself across this spectrum. So today I wanted to address that a little bit and really hopefully shed some light on what this looks like and the difference between how it expresses itself in a marginalized body versus a privileged body. In general patterns, to be very clear, this is not going to apply to everyone, but in general patterns, what that looks like. So if you haven't seen my body image avatars work yet, go watch the videos, read the posts, buy my avatars guide and check that out and take the self-assessment because that is what this work is based on. This video is not going to make sense if you haven't seen it. So if you have seen it and you want to learn more, let's start with the Self Objectifier. And the Self Objectifier is somebody who is essentially trying to motivate the world to give them what they want by looking attractive or being desirable. So when someone is essentially succeeding at that plan to be attractive or desirable enough that they are able to more or less successfully motivate people to give them whatever it is they're looking for, that expresses a very particular way, and it usually looks like anxiety and imposter syndrome and a feeling of being unseen or invisible for who they are as people because they are being objectified. So they are being seen or valued or celebrated for something that is not who they really are as people. They are being seen and valued and celebrated for their body, for their appearance, for their sex appeal, for whatever. So that tends to be how that expresses. And a lot of times that's internalized stuff, the anxiety of like, I need to maintain this appearance. Like if I get older, if I get pregnant, if I gain weight, all those things are going to ruin this for me. This is the only way in which I'm celebrated and valued. This is my only access to being worthy in the world. So all of that anxiety is like really, really wound up for a lot of self-objectifiers in privileged bodies because that is what has been reinforced for them. Now, of course, it's a spectrum, right? So there's plenty and plenty of gray area nuance in the middle of this spectrum. But if we go all the way over to somebody whose body is not conforming to beauty ideals, not succeeding at being conventionally attractive, not succeeding at being at the top of all of these body hierarchies that they are trying to be at the top of. So let's say somebody who is in a large body and doesn't fit conventional gender expression norms or conventional beauty ideals, et cetera, et cetera. How does this person, if they are a self-objectifier, manifest body image issues? Well, it's different because they're not trying to maintain something. They never had that something. So what this person is more likely to experience is a feeling of deep shame that something is wrong with them and that they can't access what they want to access because they don't have the right look, a feeling of deep isolation, and often, honestly, a lot of anger and resentment towards people who look a certain way because there is a feeling that they are being excluded from a lot of life because they don't have the right look. So there is often a lot of despair on this side of the spectrum for the self-objectifier. There's a lot of hopelessness. There is sometimes just outright rage, like this is so unfair. And it is. I mean, it totally is unfair, right? This is all justified. But so that is where we end up seeing that be expressed. And when that comes out on the body or in the body image, it can look a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's sort of self-harm in the form of behaviors around food and exercise and any number of things. Sometimes it is a constant attempt to get where they want to be, like constantly trying to lose weight, constantly trying to find the right beauty, skin routine, get the right haircut, find the right clothes. Like it may be a reaching for it where there is sometimes that feeling of hope, like, this time I can get it, I can get there. And then there is often that crashing back down when the plan fails to get them what they want, maybe they try to lose weight and they lose a little weight and then they gain it back or something like that, there's often that crashing back in of despair, of hopelessness, of anger and resentment, of shame. All these things can show up in body image issues a lot of different ways. Either all that stuff just aimed directly at your body, like you are raging at your body, or you are raging or feeling shame, I should say, about this vessel, or feeling like rage at the people who have excluded you, or feeling like, any number of things can show up here. But that is what it tends to look like. It's heavier, it's lonelier insofar as it is often very isolating. It is sadder, I think, as opposed to when we're in a privileged body, it tends to be more high-strung, more anxious. The pain for the privileged body self-objectifier tends to be fear of loss and a feeling that they were not worthy of being there in the first place. The pain for somebody in a marginalized body tends to be that they are deeply unhappy with the fact that they are being excluded from what they want. They are not able to access what they want. These are the clients who will often tell me, I'm just never going to find anybody to love me, or who would ever have sex with me. And there's this feeling of like, it's just never gonna happen. And that is deeply lonely and sad and painful. So that is the big difference between the top of these body hierarchies, somebody who sort of conforms to the top of these body hierarchies in our society, and somebody who does not conform to these body hierarchies and finds themselves in a position of being marginalized or oppressed. So they are also at the level of oppression and marginalization here, facing a lot of obstacles that are very, very real and difficult, including like harassment and abuse, violence and discrimination, and inability to access adequate medical care and housing and education, not being able to make as much money. Like there's so many aspects of discrimination that they are fighting against, that all of that really just, in terms of the stress load that puts on the body, all of that also is very draining. Because not only are they just feeling their feelings like everybody else, they are also battling a lot more on a daily basis, that they have to, to be resilient in this space is an endless task. It's so much work. You constantly have to be re-upping your resilience and, continuing to process, like letting things go and building up the skills to handle the next thing. And it's exhausting. So I also think it should be said that there is, at this end of the spectrum, an exhaustion. In their body image issues, it might be like, I just can't be in this body anymore. I am exhausted by hating my body. I am exhausted by feeling this way. That there is that, again, I could call it despair, but I think it has to be said that there is an exhaustion and a fatigue to battling the obstacles that are put in front of them because of marginalization, discrimination, and oppression. Now, I would say the other two body image avatars that fall into a very similar pattern are the high achiever and the outsider. So for the high achiever, again, the end of the spectrum of somebody in a privileged body is a lot of imposter syndrome. And it's a lot of anxiety. It's a lot of stress. It's a lot of feeling like I earned my way here and now I'm special and important and I look how everybody says I should look. And if I mess up even one thing, if I eat carbs, if I, skip the gym, whatever, something horrible will happen. Because everything is based on the fact that I work to get here. And the outsider similarly is like, I look normal enough, I fit in here, people don't notice me too much, I'm not going to be humiliated for my body, I've done everything right, I've checked all the boxes, which means I'm going to be okay, other people will love me, they will accept me, they will be my friend, and if I gained weight, if I, changed too much, if anything about me, sort of became less privileged, then I'd be in trouble. I'd lose all my connections, I would have no friends, I would have no community. So there is that constant fear and anxiety for people who are more or less getting their needs met, or at least sort of superficially getting their needs met through their appearance or body, or at least they think they are. And on the other side of that, we've got people in marginalized bodies who are, again, really stuck in the message of shame that they did the thing that made them unable to get what they want. Because they look around at the world and they say, okay, well, I can see who has friends and connections. I can see who has relationships and partnerships and great sex, and it's not people who look like me. Or they might experience the kind of harassment and bullying and, sort of endless microaggressions of anti-fat bias and racism and sexism and ableism and ageism and all these things. And they might learn people like me don't deserve those things. Or people like me, it's disgusting if we want those things. Anything. Anything in this realm, it leads to a lot of internalization of shame that leads to despair. It leads to a hopelessness, leads to a feeling of complete exclusion and an inability to access what you need, which is just devastating. And at the same time, they are upholding a constant battle just to make it through because they're facing oppression, they're facing discrimination, they're facing marginalization. So they are also exhausted. And for the high achiever, a lot of this basically looks like sort of shame around laziness. Like I earned every bit of bad treatment that has come towards me because I'm so lazy I couldn't get it together enough to look like a person in a privileged body. Like I was too lazy to stick to my diet, for example. So that's on me. And now because I live in a bigger body, if people are mean to me or they discriminate against me, that's my fault. That is often, not always, but often the mindset of shame, super, super internalized oppression that lives in people whose bodies do not conform to, the top of the body hierarchy societally. And so we've got a lot of that shame. We've got a lot of the despair and the heaviness and the sadness and the isolation. And I would say kind of as always, with the outsider as well, it is very similar. It is, of course people don't love me. Of course people don't like me. Of course people are talking about me behind my back. Of course people would set me up to be humiliated. Because a lot of that stuff, some of it even happens, right? It's not even a completely unrealistic idea, which makes it even more horrendous, even more brutally painful. So we've got these two sides of the spectrum here. And it shows up differently. Like if I work with a client who lives in a more marginalized body, and let's say they identify as a high achiever, they're much more likely to tell me, that they really just aren't good people. And the proof is in their body. And that the reason they hate their body is because everyone can look at them and just see you're not a good person. You are not hardworking. You have no self-control. You are out of control, and I can just tell by looking at you. And there is that deep shame that their body's broadcasting something horrible to the world. And that's a lot of their body image issues come up around this feeling of like, oh my God, everybody can see that I'm out of control, And likewise, for the outsider as well, they're a lot more likely to tell me that it sort of makes sense if people don't accept them, or that they almost deserve to be humiliated. And how could they ever trust anyone when they just are not the right kind of person, that's the internalized shaminess that tends to go on there. So that is those three, the high achiever, the self-objectifier, and the outsider all tend to have a very similar looking privileged and marginalized expression of body image issues. The one that's different is the runner, because the runner is seeking safety and control, control in order to feel safe, I should say, and particularly control over the body, particularly control over the emotions, safety from their own emotions, their own pain, their own discomfort a lot of times. So for them, if you live in a privileged body or you don't, it doesn't necessarily look that same way, because it really isn't about trying to motivate other people to do something to or for you. It's about trying to make yourself feel safe internally. So yes, there is an aspect of feeling safer in a privileged body. And a lot of my runners will tell me like, oh, the safest I ever felt was, when I conformed to certain ideals or I weighed a certain amount or whatever. Like they will tell me in a more privileged body, I felt safer. And that's valid because again, they are trying to keep bad things from happening to them. They're trying to stay safe, which means anything that creeps towards oppression is going to feel unsafe, right? So they will often have that kind of locked-in experience of I was safer when, or I will only be safe if, which of course isn't accurate because you cannot make yourself actually be safe. You can acknowledge the truth of marginalization and discrimination, but you cannot keep bad things from happening to you. So it is an illusion of safety, but there is a reason that illusion exists, right? And then the further along we kind of get towards an unsafe body because of discrimination, because of violence, because of marginalization and oppression, we really are talking about a person who has to learn how to feel safe in a world that is the least safe for them. So if we're looking at like a fat, black, trans person, trans women specifically, because we know that the rates of violence towards trans women is so much higher, that person is going to move through the world and be unsafe, literally physically and emotionally unsafe constantly. They're going to constantly be dealing with the fact that unsafety is everywhere around them. And if they were to have a body that fit into more privileged, at the top of these higher body hierarchies so that they had more privilege, they would not have to face those things. So this is very real, right? I think for the runner, that is the most difficult space in which we really hold that fact, the unfair, unjust fact that we live in an unfair and unjust world. So some bodies are safer than others. There's no safe bodies. There's nothing you can do to actually stay safe, but there are safer and there are less safe bodies. And unfortunately for the runner, a lot of times we're just looking at how much fear you have around the fact that you are unsafe. When it comes to someone who's in a really marginalized body, though, what we also see is that shame, that internalized idea that they did something to deserve it. So really the only thing I can say here is when we are looking at that shame, the healing work to be done is not to believe you're safer. It's to believe that this system is unjust and that you did not deserve this. You did not call upon this by having a body. That the fault, and like we have to be really clear, who is at fault here? And it is the system of oppression and the people who create harm within it. So for example, somebody who said, oh, I was bullied as a kid because I was fat, I would challenge that because that really sounds like being fat means you should be bullied, that's a sort of justifiable act. When actually what is true is I was fat and I was bullied by someone who was fat phobic. Or fat phobia made a bully me. Like that really places the blame where it belongs, not on you. So the shamey piece is often what we're seeing in all four of the avatars, but I think with the runner it's the most sticky because they are also afraid, for good reason, to live in the body they live in. They tend to really, I think, hold the weight of sort of the burden of it being their fault in such a way that we really have to like dig it out and sort of unroot it. So this is kind of what I tend to see. And obviously every individual is different, but these are the patterns that tend to show up. I hope that is of use for you, and I definitely want to keep making content that sort of leans into and explores and talks about the side of the spectrum that leans towards more marginalized bodies, in part because, oh my God, this is so important and we need to be talking about it, and in part because I never want to give the impression that there's like anything more normal about leaning towards the privileged side of things. I live in a privileged body and I am very aware of my own what material comes to me naturally and organically is the result of my experiences. And so I am always trying to redirect, refocus, and bring the work back to where it needs to be, which is body liberation for all. So I appreciate the feedback. I'm going to keep trying to share stuff like this and talk about it like this. And hopefully that makes some stuff click for you if this is relevant to your life experience. So that's it. Thank you for being here. If this is helpful, if you like my work and my videos, please hit like, hit subscribe, turn the notifications on, and keep tuning back every week because I make videos for you here every week. And I'll see you next time.